And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. Hey, so you might have heard about Blue Apron. That's the meal service company where they send you meals each week and they send you all the ingredients so it's ready to cook. Well, if you've been thinking about trying Blue Apron, go to insidethehall.com/Blue Apron and find out details for how you can get $30 off of your first order. And if you're interested in learning more and want to hear about my personal experience using Blue Apron, stick around for the end of this episode and I will share that story with you. And again, that URL is insidethehall.com/Blue Apron. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, one of our favorite recurring guests, Chronic Hoosier, is back. He's been over there with Zach Osterman on the Mind Your Banners podcast this season, but we appreciate him giving us about a half hour of his time to provide some insight on the first season of the Archie Miller era. We find out kind of what he's feeling after the kind of the topsy-turvy up and down first 25 games of Archie's tenure. We go on depth on some individual players, guys like Juwan Morgan and Devonte Green and Robert Johnson and Zach McRoberts. And then we discuss what will success be for Archie Miller here as we move forward for the rest of this season. All of that and more on this edition of Podcast on the Brink. Buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated and confusing, but there is a better way to buy, and that is with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event. Whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out, or need to find the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. I can vouch that it is by far the easiest way that I have found to shop for tickets. I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats. I'm planning on doing that with my wife. We have a 17-month-old, but we're planning some date nights out, and one of the things we're going to do is look for some musicians that we want to see, and SeatGeek will be the first place that we go to look for concert tickets here in Dallas where we live, so hopefully we can find some, because we know if they're there and if there are good prices, then we will find them on SeatGeek, because SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. SeatGeek saves you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and help you find amazing deals. And best of all, Podcast on the Brink listeners get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code BRINK today, BRINK, for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. And joining us this week on Podcast on the Brink, Alex Bozich, of course, as always, and the great Chronic Hoosier back with us for the first time in a while. And it's been pretty eventful since the last time you were here with us, Chronic. Congratulations on your new show with Zach Osterman over there at the Indy Star, Mind Your Banners. It's become a regular listen for me and many IU fans, I'm sure.
I certainly appreciate it. I'm just happy every week when I find out I didn't get us canceled. So we celebrate often.
Oh man, no, it's great having your voice, out there on a regular basis talking IU basketball. You've obviously got a great perspective and a lot of knowledge, and that's why we wanted to bring you on to just kind of take your temperature for how you're feeling so far. I mean, obviously this season has been a disappointment, kind of in a macro sense. A lot of us, me especially, kind of talked ourselves into the idealized version of what this team could be and thought that an NCAA tournament berth was realistic. And maybe that was a realistic expectation to have, but that's not how it's played out, and due to injury and underperformance, and maybe it just taken a little while to understand Archie's system. It's taken a little while, but it feels like things are starting to click, especially on the defensive end. And so I'm just curious to know how you're feeling, and just kind of what your thoughts are here so far, after 20-some games in year one of the Archie Miller era.
One of the things I really want to do this morning that unfortunately is my day got hijacked to start. I wasn't able to. I wanted to go back and look at my tailgate podcast that Alex had joined me on from Assembly Hall before Hoosier Hysteria. and go back and get specifically what our projections were for the season, just as kind of a point of reference. Because if I recall at the time, I think I was kind of like yourself, where I felt perhaps a little overly optimistic, given the reality of what Archie was returning and what he had coming in. But I think more importantly, looking at this season now, as we look back and kind of the journey that's got us here, I remember thinking early on that all the analysts, all the prognosticators that had pegged IU, essentially in the bottom third of the league, some at the, pretty far to the bottom of that third, and how we were, maybe disbelieving of that possibility. I think it's interesting now as you look at that. There were definitely moments along the way, obviously the Indiana State game to start, and then Fort Wayne, and all the bumps in the road to get to here, that very easily could have pointed to a very bottom of the bottom third finish. And here we are with, essentially in the backstretch of the conference season, and IU sitting in a tie for seventh right now. They've certainly got, some winnable games ahead of them, and there's no reason. Well, I don't want to make absolutes. It's certainly within the realm of possibilities that this team finishes in the top half of the conference this year. And, if I recall, I think Alex and I both had them somewhere around the middle-ish, give or take a spot or two. And while it was certainly a long and winding road to get here, I think it's pretty remarkable that that's actually what's now within reach as we head into the final 5 games of the conference season.
Chronic, kind of a loaded question here for you, but when you look at this season so far, I'm curious what has been, from your fan perspective, the most encouraging thing you've seen, and what's been the most disappointing thing you've seen?
I think, and I was really trying to wrap my head around this last night. I have been incredibly encouraged by, kind of tailing off on my last response, to see how far they've come in terms of their toughness, their tenacity, which was certainly something that was deserving of question after the Fort Wayne game, for example. The way in which Arch has been able to achieve a buy-in pretty much down the line on this team, as far as instilling his identity, his philosophies into the way this team plays. You look at the Michigan State game, and when you can out rebound Michigan State is no small feat. When you can get a guy like Freddie McSwain to pull down 3 times more offensive boards than the entire Spartan lineup combined, I think speaks volumes to his ability to get through to these guys what he's trying to do here. And it hasn't been an easy process. And I don't think it's in any way, shape, or form completed at this point. But I think, particularly when you look at it in terms of where they finished last year, as far as their defensive numbers, as far as the rebounding numbers, their turnover numbers. I mean, this was something that IU fans bemoaned for seasons and seasons on end, was just how careless this team had just grown to become with the ball. They just simply didn't take care of it. They didn't value the basketball. And I think when you objectively look at what Archie has, what assets this team has, as well as what liabilities it has, I think it's been extremely impressive how far he's been able to make gains in those areas of defense and turnovers, ball security, and rebounding. As far as disappointment, I certainly didn't anticipate this team would struggle as mightily as it has just shooting the basketball. And even more to the point, their free throws have just been nothing I've ever seen. I would have to get an updated media guide. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is the worst free throw shooting team in IU history. I believe, and I'm certain actually, this is the worst 3-point shooting team in IU history.
I sure hope so.
I can't remember being more miserable watching them shoot deep balls or free throws, but I never imagined in the state of Indiana at its flagship school, Indiana University, that free throws would be such a monumental struggle for this team. And I've made reference throughout the season that I believe it's mental. I think like putting, it's between the ears. These guys have shooting mechanics. They have that muscle memory. Something's going on. Archie said after the game last night and post game, it is what it is at this point. I don't think there's a magic wand that's going to come and correct it. It's interesting to me that you can go a game in Michigan State where the free throw shooting really helped keep them in it. At least help keep them competitive. They were able to shoot 72%. And then, 48 hours later, against Rutgers, they manage, 44%. That's got to change. That absolutely has to change. I don't know how, but that's been really, really tough to watch. Now, recruiting some shooters is certainly going to go a long way here. Obviously, Arch isn't done on that front just yet. But that's something that this team sorely is going to need going into next season. And, last night, the first half, it was amazing how easily the offense came when they were just able to knock down shots at a respectable rate. So, yeah, I'm getting
your dog is worked up about the free throws, and
that's not Elwood. We had to put him on. Actually, I didn't put Elwood on lockdown. He may make an appearance later.
Oh, that was Alex's dog.
Yeah, that was my dog. My apologies there. Sorry to interrupt your train of thought there, Chronic, but the other guy I kind of want to ask you about is Robert Johnson, because to me he's been, in terms of like the feedback that I get from fans, people posting on the forum, people saying things on Twitter, there's people who are really impressed with the season he's had in terms of what he's brought defensively, and then there's others who have been disappointed with kind of his inconsistencies with the shooting. Where do you stand right now on Robert Johnson in the season that he's having to date?
Rob is one of those examples or those data points I would direct people to in kind of in bolstering my argument that Arch is actually taking root with these guys, that he's getting through to them. I think Rob was, at least from my perspective, it seemed like he struggled early on. This was a role that was unfamiliar to him. He had always been a key player for the the various rosters he's been a part of. He was always more in a supporting role, and I think that really gave him a lot of room to flourish on the court. And this year, it became clear early on that offensively, as far as the backcourt at least, he was going to have to be the number one option as far as a guard to shoot. And it was something that didn't come easy to him. He struggled pretty mightily, and my timeline reflected much of what yours has, I think, in as much as there was a time not long ago, there were plenty of people who were very loudly calling for an outright benching of all the senior guards and just resigning them to history and letting their careers end. And Zach and I made the case that was probably not the wisest move. If nothing else, Archie just doesn't have the guard depth on this roster to be able to do something like that. That being said, though, I think it absolutely deserves mentioning that he has responded probably as well as you could hope or even fathom for someone in his position to make the kind of flip the switch like he has mid-season and just become a more consistent, reliable scorer. I don't think his numbers are going to end up finishing, in the top half of his career, but I think when you look at it just in context of where he started the season through the midway point to where he is right now, I think you're looking at a guy who has not only found comfort in his newfound role, but has probably started to. I think you see it a lot with these seniors that, particularly in seasons that maybe don't go as well as they had hoped. There comes a point of reckoning where you have to realize your legacy is about to come to a conclusion here, and it's up to you to write the final chapter of it. And I think Rob, and I think you can make the same argument for Freddie, are a couple of guys who have really embraced that and are going out there game in, game out, doing everything they can to make the most of their legacy at Indiana.
Chronic, I want to get your thoughts on Juwan Morgan and his remarkable season next. Before we do that, I do want to remind everyone to go to HoosierProud.com. And there are a few reasons why you should go to HoosierProud.com. Naturally, they are an Indiana-based brand that is for Hoosiers and by Hoosiers, and that's why they've been so supportive of shows like this one, obviously the Assembly Call as well. And when you go there, you will see all the incredible designs that Hoosier Proud has. And those designs include, obviously, the Inside the Hall and Assembly Call t-shirts. They also have officially licensed IU gear this year, football shirts, basketball shirts, soccer-themed shirts, and then kind of their flagship t-shirts that feature really unique elements of the Hoosier State. Just a bunch of really cool designs there. You can check them all out at HoosierProud.com. And one great benefit of shopping there is that your T-shirt purchases support Indiana-based charities, because Hoosier Proud is committed to supporting Indiana-based charities, and you can find out what charities they support when you go to their website. And best of all, of course, you save money because our friends at Hoosier Proud are very generous with you, our audience here at Podcast on the Brink. And so when you use the promo code BRINK, BRINK, you get 15% off of your entire order. So that's everything that you put in your shopping cart, not just one shirt, not just the Inside the Hall shirts, but everything, 15% off when you use the promo code BRINK. That is at HoosierProud.com. So let's talk a little bit about Juwan Morgan, who is absolutely having a breakout season this year. And we had obviously seen flashes of it as a freshman and a sophomore, but he's really putting it all together this year. And so many games has just put this team on his back and has been the one guy game in, game out that you can really count on for production. And, now he's starting to expand his game even more. He's actually shooting over 40% from three-point range in Big Ten play, knocked down 3 out of 4 against Rutgers. And, from your perspective, Chronic, he's obviously been great, and it's the kind of season that makes you start kind of searching for historical precedents. I know I mentioned before that it kind of reminds me a little bit of Brian Evans' senior year, just in terms, he's not statistically that great, but that kind of pressure game in, game out to carry the team. What have been your thoughts so far watching Juwan's evolution from role player to bona fide Big Ten superstar?
At this point, I've run out of superlatives to describe his game. I mean, he's doing so much, and just defensively. And I think it's easy to overlook because the box scores don't track what a lot of these guys have to do on defense unless it results in a steal or a block. But the fact that he's having to go out there, and on the defensive end, he's having to take the opponent's most formidable post players and just throwing everything he has at him from an undersized position against most of these matchups, mind you, and just working his tail off. But to have to pull that load on defense and then turn around and go the other end of the floor, and clearly he's been IU's number one scoring option, and for good reason now for pretty much the entirety of the season, but especially since Jerod went out. It's truly remarkable, and even beyond that. I mean, I'm trying to think. Was it Michigan State or Ohio State where he keeps taking these injuries, and I cringe and I wince, and I cuss not so softly, and then all of a sudden it's like he just shrugs it off and just continues to chug down the floor without any real noticeable drop off in his productivity. The dude is just tougher than a $2 steak. And, we saw this when he was a freshman. And if you recall, when he kept dislocating his shoulder, and it was gruesome to watch him just continue to do it game in, game out. But you kind of get the sense that this isn't some fake toughness. This isn't something, one of those guys that just goes out there and pounds their chest. He demonstrates his leadership. He demonstrates his toughness. He's not a very flashy guy. He's not one to boast. He does a little bit of flexing, but he's not that guy. Instead, he just goes out there and gives you everything he's got on both ends of the floor every single night. And I think, I don't know that we'll ever be able to qualify just how important that leadership role and him demonstrating that toughness has been for the improvements this team's been able to make, for the toughness that they've been able to kind of duplicate or to replicate across the lineup now. He's everything you could hope for in the position that he's been cast in with this team. And I'm actually a little worried to see his newfound 3-point shooting prowess, because that's probably going to be one of his greatest hurdles making it to the NBA. Is a guy with his size, as tough as he is, as good as he is on the boards, he's got to have a shot. He's going to have to demonstrate a jumper, and he's doing it now. So hopefully it's going to be too late for him to get too much attention going into the draft this year. But I'll tell you what, if it's something he's able to continue to develop and to grow, I don't think it's unrealistic that he might find himself in the league at some point.
No, and if he does develop it and comes back, how on earth do you guard him? I mean, just with, if he's able to shoot and play as well as he does inside and, have the offensive rebound offense he gets, he's just having a remarkable season. Let me ask you about another guy who has kind of been the story of these last few games, and it's Devonte Green, who has really stepped into a playmaking void in the guard slot and has seemed to kind of start to leave some of his really poor decision-making and kind of lackadaisical stretches in games behind, and is really starting to kind of play like the guy we hoped he could be. And obviously he's got, a long track record of inconsistency, so it'll take more than 3 games, I think, for everybody to buy in. But if Devonte Green keeps playing like this, he really adds an element that this Indiana team hasn't had, and it's potentially a really good sign for what he can be as an upperclassman at Indiana over the next 2 years.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's by far and away been one of this team's greatest liabilities so far this year has been their play at point guard. And it's obviously it's the quarterback of the floor. It's arguably going to be one of the most important positions on any coach's scheme, right? On any lineup. And it's certainly been a hindrance to IU, but to have a guy on the floor that can both create plays for others, as well as knock down some shots when the plays just aren't there, it's absolutely crucial for this team. It's going to be crucial for any team, but especially this team. Several games ago, I had said that Devonte was the new Troy Williams, and it was perhaps said when he was having one of his down games. And a lot of people took that as a slam on the kid, a backhanded compliment at best. And I think what got lost in that comparison is Troy had a pretty ridiculous upside too. When Troy's playing well, he had the ability to completely, to totally impact games and tilt them towards IU's favor. And I think that holds true with Devonte. When he is playing at the level we've seen here recently, it absolutely adds a new dynamic to IU's offense that is desperately needed. Like it's so difficult for these guys when, in any given rotation, you have generally no more than 2 scoring options on the floor at any given time. And that's usually when Rob and Juwan are on the floor together. When one of those guys sits, it gets exponentially more difficult because we're probably only going to have one legitimate scoring option. So to have a guy like Devonte out there playing as he is now, who both brings the ability to score as well as distribute to open guys, that's what it's going to take to get Freddie closer to double digits. That's what it's going to get Colin maybe back in a groove where he can get some outside shots falling again. You've got to have the playmaker on the floor who also brings that ability to score when needed as necessary. And Devontae's emergence in that role, it's certainly come at the expense of Josh Newkirk's minutes. I guess as far as a lot of the fans who are calling for wholesale changes to the roster, there is the benefit in as much as, Devonte is going to have that much more experience under his belt going forward. If he can continue to grow, continue to kind of run things the way Archie's wanting run, I suppose this is another data point you can look at and say, you could see a lot of games in the past where he wasn't necessarily running as efficiently as Archie wanted to, and Archie had no problem sitting him. And it would appear, at least, that message has taken hold because Devontae is staying on the floor a whole lot longer, and good things are happening for him and for the Hoosiers right now.
Chronic, I know this is not a recent development, but since we haven't talked to you in a while, Zach McRoberts has been, to me at least, one of the big keys of the season. How surprised are you at the contributions that he's been able to make on this team? We saw it at times last season, but he obviously didn't play this much. There was more talent on last year's roster, but this year, the first third of the season, first 5 or 6 games, he really wasn't even getting on the floor, and now he is, in my mind, one of the 3 or 4 guys that Indiana simply can't afford not to have on the floor. So how surprised are you at the impact that he's having on this team?
It's McBob is going to go down. He's getting near, but he's getting near Tijon Air for me right now. Like he's entering that realm, simply because it's everything this team needs so often. I can't remember if it was you, Alex, or who I saw last night that had mentioned, we've got to the point where when he sits, you cringe because there's going to be a drop off. He's become one of those integral rotation players that if I use going to make a run, if I use going to hold a lead, you got to have him on the floor. I think he's absolutely one of the 3-4 best players on this team right now. I couldn't be happier for the kid. I think, he's a walk-on. I think people overlook the fact that he was, in fact, a scholarship player. He was Vermont, probably mid-major range, but I think he is emblematic of what a lot of folks have been pining for, in as much as he's one of those guys that he's just so fundamentally sound in so many ways, but more than anything, you never question Zach's effort. Ever. It's just something that's a given. It's a constant. His ability to impact the game in so many different ways other than the score sheet. I've nicknamed him a tip god because he's just that guy who always seems to find himself in the right position, and that's not accidental. It's something we've seen far too often where he makes winning plays, man, and it's been awesome to see it happen. I still wish, and I think we're past the point of people freaking out. Now I'm going to move my bandwagon over to Johnny Jagger. He needs to get some of that Priller love when he gets on the floor. But Zach's that guy who's truly transcended, just the fan favorite, kind of Bronx jeer when he gets on the floor. This dude's it. He's the real deal. He's absolutely essential now to Indiana winning. And honestly, I hope Arch kind of learns a lesson from it and maybe recognizes, and it's going to be tough the way that his scholarships and those availabilities are falling. But, when you can cherry pick, I look back to, I think I kind of hold him in the same esteem as I did Derek Elston. One of those guys that, doesn't really raise a lot of eyebrows when you see him on the roster, at least, somebody that you're going to peg immediately as an impact player. But in hindsight, you recognize just how integral they were to the team's success, both on the floor as far as cultivating team chemistry. I think he's absolutely one of those guys. And I hope, going forward, Archie realizes while you're chasing, the Garlands and the Romeos and everything else, without fail, every year there's going to be a kid or two, maybe not the most heralded recruit, but whether he's an Indiana All-Star or an Ohio All-Star or whatever, he's just one of those blue-collar dudes that you absolutely have to have a couple of on your roster.
Chronic, the Big Ten, obviously, this year, I think has a couple of teams that could win the national championship, and I know Indiana fans don't want to hear that about Purdue, but I think it's totally a possibility. Michigan State, the same thing. But after that, I know we've talked in years past whether this is the deepest we can remember the Big Ten. This year, and I don't think any of us are using hyperbole when we say this, this is probably the worst from top to bottom I can remember the Big Ten being. Would you agree with that? And what do you kind of see as the reasons for that? Obviously there's some top heavy teams, but beyond that, I mean, the middle just seems really soft right now.
No, absolutely. And I think it is markedly down from what we've come to expect from the league, which is kind of unique too, because actually I think the bottom of the league is actually elevated above an average that we've kind of become accustomed to. But I think that's completely offset and totally negated actually by just how soft the middle has become so far this year. There's certainly, I think, when you go down the line, the list of teams, Minnesota that was so highly regarded coming into it by virtue of injury and just heinous player conduct, has really fallen off. Maryland got the injury bug as well. Without making excuses, it is what it is. And I think it's certainly enabled Indiana to kind of position itself where it is now, where they're pretty solidly in the center of the conference. But, it doesn't help, I guess, too, when you have teams like Purdue, when you have a team like Michigan State, even Ohio State for that matter. I think of the top three of those three teams, at least Purdue, Michigan State, and Ohio State, I feel like Ohio State's going to be most susceptible to getting picked off early in the tournament. I do agree that Michigan State and Purdue have absolute Final Four potential to them. Whether or not they actualize that remains to be seen. I don't know what it's going to take. In this league, we've kind of risen and fallen by our blue bloods, and I don't think it helps when Maryland's down. Wisconsin's fall off has been staggering. Truly staggering. But maybe this is just their position in the post Bo Ryan era. I hope, I guess, from a selfish standpoint, that Archie's able to kind of get things rolling here sooner than later, because it would look, at least in the short term, there's going to be opportunity for him to advance IU back up into that upper echelon of league play in a relatively short order if he's able to kind of get things as far as his roster construction to go according to plan so far.
You took the words right out of my mouth there, Chronic, because the thing that I look at with the Big Ten right now, obviously no national championship since 2000, and there were some chances there. Obviously, Wisconsin had that year where they were close, but I think ultimately for the Big Ten to get back to being a top 2 league nationally every year, the league needs Indiana to be good, and the consistency hasn't been there. And I agree with you. You look around the league right now, you don't know what's going to happen long term with Michigan State. I think it's very much up in the air what's going to happen with Tom Izzo. Wisconsin, I think Greg Gard could be successful potentially, but he's not Bo Ryan. Ohio State, that's very much up in the air as well. When you look at the long-term future there, I mean, they're going to have a lot of turnover after this season, and you just kind of go down the list, and you don't really see a whole lot in the Big Ten that gives you a lot of optimism that it's going to be a great league. But then you look at Indiana, and you kind of say potentially a sleeping giant. If Archie can string together a few good recruiting classes here, and a couple of years from now, I think you could be looking at Indiana as being the class of the Big Ten, and I think in a lot of ways that's what the league needs to kind of get back to being elite again.
No, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the league's Final Four appearances in the last couple of decades, you with the modern construction of the Big Ten, I think the league absolutely needs Indiana to become nationally relevant again. And especially in the vacuum that Wisconsin's now left in that scene, I would even look at Maryland and be like, this is a team that had a pretty solid reputation coming out of the Big East. Out of the ACC, where they would certainly benefit the league if they could get back closer to that level of national relevance. But totally selfishly, the table's set for Archie here. If he can continue to get things going in the direction he's trying to, and it's a game of talent, and his ability to amass talent, not just recruiting ranking talent, but as far as getting the guys who can execute the system he's trying to put in here. I think there is infinite opportunity available to him. And one thing selfishly I'm looking forward to as well is I would love to return to an era where Indiana and Purdue are on more equal footing. It seems like as of late, it's been a really lopsided series one way or another. It's rare that we find two teams, pretty equally matched, at least competitively seeing eye to eye. And Purdue's done their part. I would love nothing more, again, selfishly, for my children to grow up in an era where that is year in, year out, one of the best games of the conference season. And, hopefully we can get back there in short order.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Last question for you, Chronic, to close us here. I think we all know what success will have to mean for Archie in the big picture. But as you look just over these next 2 months, Indiana's got a couple of games that I would describe as very winnable here at home against Minnesota and Illinois. And then you've got 3 games down the stretch at Iowa, at Nebraska, and at home against Ohio State that you would hope Indiana could win 1, maybe 2 of those. So, I mean, you've got an opportunity here sitting at 6-7 right now to get to maybe 9, possibly even 10 Big Ten wins if things really go your way. And who knows if that puts you in position, to make the NIT or not. And then you've got the Big Ten tournament, and then hanging over all of it, maybe in mid-March or at the McDonald's game is the decision by Romeo Langford that will probably be more consequential than anything that actually happens on the court over the next couple of months. How will you judge success for Archie Miller here over these next couple of months and leading into the offseason?
I certainly think that as we head into the end of the season, I absolutely agree. You need to win ideally at least 4 of the final 5. Even realistically, I think 500 is a very, very attainable goal for this team. Plus 500. To just more than anything, I think maintain the momentum that he's established at this point. Now, you talk about momentum, and we just lost 4 of our last 5 in a row. But I also kind of look at that, and with the exception of the Illinois game, the second half particularly, and the first half of the Ohio State game, I feel like we've seen this team progressing towards something that is positive, that is something that he's going to be able to build on in seasons to come. Just to keep that going more than anything, not to have a letdown, not to have a major setback. I think this is a team that could make a little bit of noise at least in the Big Ten tournament. Certainly don't want to be a first game exit, but take it one at a time and see what you can do the next game. But let's be honest. Here we are a year later, and I fully expect this team to qualify for the NIT, at least hopefully at this point. And I fully expect this team, this program, this fan base to be more than happy. Well, maybe not more than happy, but to be content to host a game in Assembly Hall if they should be given that chance, rather than surrendering it and going and playing on the road. And I understand there are a lot of fans whose pride, rightfully or wrongfully, kind of inhibits them from really enjoying where we are at this point. This should somehow be beneath us. But kind of like Archie said last night, man, it is what it is, and we are who we are. And that's not going to change in the final month of this season. So, we've been along this ride for a long, long time. We've supported far worse teams. We've supported teams that had far less upside. I'm genuinely excited. We knew going into this that it was going to be a process. We knew going into this season that it was going to be kind of a foundational year where he was really going to have to establish some things that might not be the sexiest or the most entertaining to watch, but ultimately it was going to pay long-term dividends for him. So I really want to see that foundation kind of finalized in this first year. I want to see that toughness transcend. I would love to see us take it on the road. I'm really, really looking at that Iowa and that Nebraska game, the Nebraska game in particular, as kind of a benchmark to see just where we are kind of towards the end of Archie's first season. And honestly, I for one, I'm optimistic about it, about the remainder of the season. I'm certainly optimistic about the future. I would certainly be a whole lot more optimistic if a certain shooting guard from Southern Indiana decided to spend his collegiate experience in Bloomington. But we'll see, man. Whether we land Romeo or not, I'd like to see a shooter find his way to Bloomington sometime sooner than later. But man, it would be something special. I know that for sure. I'm already planning my sectional and regional watching activities, and I'm going. I'm going to make a point. I remember what it was like when Alfred was in the tournament. I remember what it was like when Damon was in the tournament, and I don't want to miss it. I don't want my kids to miss it. And with any luck, hopefully our kids will be able to watch him, take that next step in Bloomington.
That's great. So, Chronic, for anybody who is not yet subscribed to Mind Your Banners, how do you best suggest people connect and subscribe so they get even more IU listening in their podcast feeds?
I would recommend, staying in touch via Twitter. Indy Star Sports page, host it. I was made aware last night. In full disclosure, I just kind of show up and blabble. I have no. Well, that's not true. I hired my dog. My dog Elwood produces our podcast. I had to fire him last night. I was informed that it has not regularly been making its way to some of the distribution channels such as iTunes and SoundCloud. So we're working. We're going to work on that. I'm going to see if I can't replace Elwood. We're going to interview. Actually, Zach's dogs Chewy and Rebel have interviews later this afternoon. So we're going to see if we can find someone maybe a little more capable to make sure that those are getting pushed out to where they should be, so that everybody can enjoy them. But for the meantime, I would definitely stay touched on IndyStar.com and follow us on Twitter. Follow you guys, man. I'll tell you what, I have spent my entire experience doing this thing with Zach, constantly measuring myself up against what you guys have established with Podcast on the Brink, the Assembly Call shows. I am never anywhere worthy of being mentioned in the same air, but I definitely appreciate the example you set, as well as just the community you guys have established, and just the opportunity for more discourse, man. I love the fact that here we are this many years later under so many different circumstances, and so many people want to engage, want to listen, want to chime in. It's just truly what the Hoosier experience is all about for me, man.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for those kind words, and thank you for joining us on this episode, Chronic. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Hey, man, always a blast to be on. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chronic.
Hey, thank you, Alex.
All right, we will talk to you all next week on another brand new episode of Podcast on the Brink. All right, so at the beginning of the episode, I told you about Blue Apron. And again, we have an affiliate relationship with them. So if you've been thinking about trying Blue Apron, go to InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. You can get $30 off of your first meal order, and we'll get a commission as well. So again, it's a great way to support the show, a great way to get started with Blue Apron at a discount and kind of give it a try. And in advance of doing this, I decided to try it out myself. My wife and I have talked about doing it, and so we finally decided to start doing it here in the new year. And I would say so far, so good. We've done 4 meals. I've enjoyed 4 of them. My wife, she didn't necessarily like the one that we had last night as much. We had a Cajun kale quiche, and she's just not a big quiche person, so that's really why. She actually said it tasted pretty good for a quiche, but she said in the future we shouldn't use our Blue Apron meals for a quiche, which I think is probably right. But some of the other meals that we had seared grass-fed steaks with sweet chili glazed vegetables. We had ancho orange chicken with kale rice and roasted carrots. And obviously it's great to, look at the menu, choose what you want to eat, and then you get this box. We get our orders on Friday afternoon. This box comes on Friday afternoon, and everything is in there. All the ingredients are portioned out correctly. There's really easy instructions. And so it makes cooking and preparing these meals a pretty simple process, and it's fun. And look, if you just want to have a good meal and eat it simply, Blue Apron is great. If you are kind of an amateur chef, and I would barely call myself an amateur chef, I mean, I enjoy cooking. I'm not that great at it, but I do like learning kind of new cooking techniques. And so that to me has been the most fun part about this. Like making the kale rice. Like that's not something I'd thought about before, but my young daughter, she's about 18 months old. She loves eating that rice. And so now, by going through and doing this, I learned how to do that. Now I can go make it on my own. So that's kind of been, a secondary or a tertiary bonus. So anyway, just give it a try. Check out InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. They've been around for a while, so, pretty trustworthy. The boxes with the meals come, really reliably. Everything in there has been fresh, has tasted really good, and they have a lot of great options. So you get a few options you can choose from. You can get them whatever day of the week that you want. So they really try and tailor the experience to you. They try to do it in a sustainable way, which is nice. So yeah, just that's my pitch. Give it a try. InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. And if you live anywhere near a Costco actually has a nice little gift certificate deal. I think for like $100 you can get $150 worth of Blue Apron meals, and so we did that, and so it was actually a way to get even better value for our money, and that still works with the $30 off that you get when you go to InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. So just a little pro tip there. All right, that's it. Give it a try, and when you do, let me know. Send me a note at Assembly Call, or email me, Jerod at assemblycall.com, and I'd love to know how it goes for you. InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.